Well, Lamine Yamal missed Barcelona's 4-1 defeat at Seville on Sunday with a groin injury. It's his second injury of the season. We're joined now by our Barcelona correspondent, Sam Marsden, but we're going to start with you, Mark. You've written a piece about Lamine Yamal, and perhaps this isn't a massive surprise that he's injured again.
No, so obviously, I think we discussed this last week on the pod that FIFPro put a 51-page report out about how players have been overworked in recent months and years, and they actually did a case study on Lamine Yamal as part of their young players being overworked element of it. And obviously, Yamal is the rising star in the world of football right now. He's only 18 and he's a player that's got a massive future, probably a future Ballon d'Or winner, future everything winner, I guess. But the concern is that he's playing too many games. Now, if you look at the stats, I mean, the stats are kind of extraordinary. If you look at Lamine Yamal, by the time he was 18, he played 130 games for club and country. Now, the next player on the list is Pau Cubarsí at Barcelona, 69 games. So that kind of shows you how much Lamine Yamal is being overworked right now. Now, obviously, people will say, well, he's young enough, he can deal with it, he's a superstar, why wouldn't Spain or Barcelona want to play him all the time? But just to give you another stat, his games or minutes on the pitch at the age of 18 are 31% higher than Jude Bellingham's. So he really is being overplayed and overworked. And obviously, we're talking today after the Sevilla game. He's ruled out of the Spain World Cup qualifiers due to injury. It's his second injury of the season. So, you know, you've got to be careful with young players. And so within the report, we've got Dr. Darren Burgess, who used to be the performance director at Liverpool and Arsenal, soon to be joining Juventus, talking about how young players, their bodies aren't fully developed until maybe the age of 25. So, you know, when you get injuries, groin strains, muscle pulls, breaks, it has an implication down the line. And this is where we're at with Lamine Yamal. I mean, obviously, Sam will know better than me because he watches Barcelona all the time. Is it a concern, Sam, that Yamal is playing too much, or is it a case of, well, he's our player, we'll play him off as often as we like?
Yeah, we obviously speak to Flick, Barca coach Hansi Flick, a lot about this, not just Lamine Yamal, but about other players. Obviously, you know, we've had high-profile examples at Barcelona in the past with, you know, Pedri had a series of injuries and is now playing regularly. He's come through that, but, you know, due to overplaying at a young age, certainly with Pedri. Gavi's ACL, perhaps not to do with overplaying, but different circumstances, but he's again had a relapse and is out. So we speak to Flick about this, and he always sort of maintains, you know, we've got, and it's true, Barcelona in general, since Flick's come in, they've improved in sort of terms of injury prevention, in terms of recovery time and whatnot, and fitness and strength, etc. And he maintains, obviously, that, you know, they're training in the vests every day and tracking data. And he says he knows when players need to rest and whatnot. But I think there are certain things that doesn't tell. Like you say, you know, Lamine Yamal has been, you know, 16, 17, 18-year-old playing for Barcelona. You need to factor in that this is a kid that is still growing. It's easy to forget how young he is, given how long he's been around. And perhaps the data shows that he is okay, but perhaps sometimes it is better to say, look, step back and don't play so much. We've asked him about Lamine quite a lot, and about Pedri as well, because Pedri's obviously overplayed. And they've actually told us, Flick's explained, Pedri's explained, that they actually did a lot of testing on Pedri when he was getting lots of injuries. Obviously, had that breakout first season, and then he went and played for Spain at the Euros and the Olympics, and then he had sort of 2 or 3 years really struggling with injuries. And they actually reckon that Pedri's type of body is actually better playing every 3 days, and that's if he stops and starts, he gets more injured. But then you get the sort of problem after the PSG game last week when Flick's going, Pedri's tired. So it's kind of like striking that balance. But there's absolutely no doubt that Lamine Yamal has been overplayed. I don't think too much. I think it's difficult to strike that balance. But obviously you've got Hansi Flick, who I don't see him being the Barcelona coach for a long time, perhaps 1-2 years more, wants to win. You've got Luis de la Fuente, the Spain coach, wants to win. He's got a World Cup next summer. They're thinking about winning short term. They're not thinking about Lamine Yamal's long-term career. And the player's too young, really, to have a grip on that type of thing. You could say that, you know, the player could take responsibility and say no or whatnot, but it's difficult to put that burden on a 17, 18-year-old.
Sam, I mean, is there a club versus country row kind of brewing with, I mean, we're talking about Lamine Yamal and also sort of Gavi and Pedri as well. Obviously, you know, Barcelona will want their best players to play for them week in, week out, and will be a bit nervous, I imagine, sending them off to international duty, particularly in a World Cup year when there's obviously a massive tournament at the end of the year.
No, not brewing. We're fully in the middle of a sort of a club v country row at the moment. Obviously, Lamine Yamal went away with Spain in September, aggravated a groin injury, came back to Barcelona, and Hansi Flick said Spain did not take care of him. They're not taking care of their young players. He said that they made him take sort of painkilling injections to play 2 World Cup qualifiers against Bulgaria and Turkey. And he played over 70 minutes in both those games, came back, missed 4 games for Barca because of this groin injury. And it was perhaps the most sort of, certainly the loudest. You know, Flick sort of stays away from making headlines or whatnot. And he was asked about that this week, and he said, I was loud because I needed to be loud. So at that time, and I I don't regret it. Came back to Barca and he sort of re-aggravated that injury. He was then called up for Spain on the Friday after he'd aggravated the injury and then dropped out later in the day. So we've got those issues sort of bubbling on. Luis de la Fuente has been very sort of stern, sort of to the point where he's sort of just sort of so stubborn and not really admitting anything. And you can see that, you know, this is probably more opinion than sort of information, but you can see when you've got a press conference and even, you know, the press in Spain are divided between Real Madrid and Barcelona. And even the Real Madrid journalists are taking De La Fuente to task, accusing him sort of taking risks with Lamine Yamal, etc. And it happened again the same day because Marc Bernal, young Barcelona midfielder, 18, he's just come back from an ACL injury. He's made 3 appearances off the bench, never more for 11 minutes, was named in the Spain under-21 squad for this international break, and Flick was again said he had no clue what Spain were doing, and about an hour later they withdrew him from the squad. So there's that tension there between Barca and the national team at the moment.
I mean, I think one issue here is that, you know, people look at Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi and say, well, look, if you look after yourself, you can play until your late 30s, 40, and those two are complete exceptions, aren't they? Because the two players that I've mentioned in my piece in terms of young players that are basically asked to do too much at too young an age are Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen. Now, we know that both those players burst onto the global scene at a major tournament when they were 18. Michael Owen at the World Cup in 98, Rooney at the Euros in 2004. A little bit like Lamine Yamal at Euro 2024, and he was only, 16 at the time. But the situation is, both Rooney and Owen played many times, certainly came back from injury too soon for England. I mean, obviously, we know that Wayne Rooney's World Cup in 2006 was ruined by the fact that he had a metatarsal injury prior to the tournament. Michael Owen was, I think, had a similar situation when he was young with a hamstring injury. Now, both those players, that their international careers were done with, they're over and done with by the time they were 30 years old. Now, are we getting to the point where the Lamine Yamals of this world are going to have a fantastic 10-year career, but once they get to their late 20s, they're just going to be so physically burnt out by playing too many games, not allowing the injuries to recover when they were younger, that we're going to see our great players have much shorter careers. Now, you know, the 20-year career that Messi and Ronaldo had, that seems to be something that's just a freak. That's never going to happen again. But it would be a real shame, Rob. I guess, you know, you've seen plenty of young players at United over the years and Man City, that if these superstar players are going to be done by the time they're age 30 years old.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking then that it would be an awful shame if Lamine Yamal for some reason wasn't able to play at the next World Cup. If he's, you know, played so many games, he's picked up so many sort of niggling injuries that he's not at the World Cup, because the whole point of a World Cup is to give a platform to the best players in the world. Obviously, Lamine Yamal is very much in that group. And you mentioned there Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen. I think from, you know, fans who have watched the Premier League for an awful lot of time will reference those two players who obviously achieved a lot and won a lot, but when they were kind of coming through at 18, 19, 20, really it looked like they were going to be kind of the best in the world for a long period of time. And, you know, Wayne Rooney in particular obviously achieved everything at Man United and is a club's record goal scorer and has won the Champions League. But there was kind of a feeling around the time that he was 30 that he was probably done. Now, he will probably tell you that, you know, he developed very, very early, so he was able to play man's football at 16 in a way that lots of players coming through the system can't play, and they have to wait till 20, 21, 22 to maybe develop to the point where they can compete in men's football. And obviously Wayne Rooney was able to do that as a teenager, but really around sort of 30, 31. And Mark, you'll have seen the same, having covered Man United, that it really felt like at the time where he should have really, really been at his physical peak and his peak in terms of his experience and everything kind of coming together to make him the complete player, that instead of being kind of right at the top, he was almost sort of over the hill and already on his way down a little bit, which, you know, for someone who watched Man United an awful lot, despite what he achieved, was a little bit of a disappointment, because there is that kind of nagging feeling possibly that he never really hit the heights that he should have done.
Yeah, and that is probably the concern with Yamal, in the sense that he's been in the game, 2.5 years now? I think he was 15 when he made his debut. I think April 2023, I think Sam will correct me if I'm wrong. 2.5 years now. He's not had a lot of injuries, but he's had enough. I think he's missed 17, 18 games now for club and country in that time. But the issue is it's the muscle strains, it's the groin strains, it's the thigh strains, it's the cumulative effect. If they don't recover properly, they become a problem later down the line. So by the time they're 23, 24, 25, these injuries that have been affecting the players during their teenage years, when they come back quickly because they're young, they're full of energy and they recover quickly, actually they haven't recovered that quickly because the body is still kind of developing. So those injuries that they get when they're 16, 17, 18, they'll hang over them when they're in the late 20s. Now, the balancing act is, how do you find a way if you're Barcelona and Spain, obviously Barcelona will challenge for the La Liga, they'll challenge for the Champions League. Spain will always be challenging at the sharp end of the major tournaments. There aren't really many free hits in terms of games. You can't really say, well, we can take you out of this competition because we're not that bothered about it. It really is a case of, you're our best player, you're going to play because we want to win these games. And you have to think, well, next year you've got a World Cup, so 2026 summer's taken care of. Then 2027, is it going to be summer of 2027 before Lamine Yamal has some time off? Because that's the only kind of, at this stage, it's the only free summer, because who knows what's going to happen. Are we going to have another Club World Cup crowbarred into the schedule then? But so he's saying right now that he's been playing pretty much for 2 years solid. And the next 18 months, 2 years is going to be football. So he's going to get to 2027 where he can have his first break. Who knows what sort of injuries he's having to recover from by then. And another element that was put to me in this study as well was it's the psychological impact as well. It's the pressure of being a 17, 18-year-old playing for Barcelona, playing for Spain, playing for the biggest teams in the world, and the scrutiny that they're under. Because obviously Sam will see this a lot, in Spain. Every single day there's intense coverage of Barcelona. Every single day there's intense coverage of Lamine Yamal. How is he handling that? Now, he might be handling it great, but we know there's been a couple of instances with parties that people think, well, should he be doing that? Should he not be doing that? So it's how he handles it. And he's got every right to have a party, but at some point, it's the strain of playing on your body and on your mind that will or could derail these young superstars.
Sam, can I just ask, though, ahead of the World Cup next summer, Spain will obviously be one of the favourites, as they always are for these major tournaments. But how big a blow would it be if Lamine Yamal is not fit enough to be at his top level, or even misses a tournament altogether? Are you talking about taking essentially their best player out of that team?
Yeah, I think the difference Lamine Yamal makes is he's obviously not the sort of, the typical player you'd associate with Spain. So if you sort of look back at the Spain team that won, 2008, 10, 12, obviously they had great strikers, but they were quite sort of, very sort of possession based. And over the years that came sort of, for want of a better word, slightly boring and predictable over the years, that they sort of started losing again before this sort of the rebirth of the current generation. And what Lamine had, you've still got that sort of, the essence of Spain with Rodri, with Pedri, with, Fabian Ruiz or whoever, the midfielders, etc. But what Lamine had is unpredictability. He can, draw 2 or 3 players to him, which creates space for others. He can create something from nothing. There are perhaps Nico Williams does that as well on the left. But in terms of, what he adds, there's no one that can add anything like him. So for Spain to be without him, they lose, huge percentage of what makes them a great team in those really big games. And he's a player, like Mark says, talking about the psychological side of things. In general, from what we see publicly, I've not seen a teenager have sort of bounce off the pressure and the sort of, the media reports or whatever there is said about him as much as Lamine does, in terms of, comments he makes and stuff, sort of feeding into that, etc. Whether that's sort of, problematic for him behind the scenes or not, we don't know. But in terms of, how he stands up in big games and stuff, he's already standing up as someone who believes he's the best player in the world. We saw it, in the Euros against France with that goal. We saw it with Barca in the Classico in the Champions League against Inter Milan. He's someone who really delivers in the big games. So you take that out of Spain and they lose a hell of a lot.
Rob, we may have a similar situation in England in the Premier League. Max Diamond's been playing for Arsenal. He's 15 years old. He's not 16 until December. So are we kind of looking at Yamal thinking this same sort of thing could happen to Max Diamond? I know that Mikel Arteta is using him quite sparingly at the moment, but he was taken on the pre-season tour to the Far East. He's a kid that's already in the first team squad at 15. So what sort of lessons can Arsenal learn from Barcelona and Yamal with Max Diamond? Because obviously it looks like a great young talent coming through.
There is always that danger with a young player coming through, because your natural instinct is to give him as much experience as possible. Because I know we talked then about young players developing physically and how important that is. It's also important that they get the experience of men's football, whether that's in the under 21s or actually in the first team squad, in that first team environment. If they're going to push on to be as good as you hope they will be, instinctively you would say, well, we need to give them as much experience as possible, as quickly as possible, because that gets them to that level quicker. It would be radical, but I would actually be in favour of the Premier League or the FA or FIFA or UEFA, whoever it is, putting in kind of load management clauses into these young players' contracts, because I do think that often the tendency is to play young players too much. I think that if there was some kind of written rule about how often they are allowed to play, maybe the minutes that they were allowed to play or the percentage of minutes, it would kind of look to preserve their careers a little bit and maybe push them to go a little bit longer, because the danger is that you just play far too much, far too young, and that, you know, by the time you're mid-20s or 30 in the case of Wayne Rooney, that you just can't compete anymore. Now, I know that wouldn't go down particularly well. It probably wouldn't go down particularly well with the players either, because I know we speak a lot about the schedule and how kind of tough it is on the players. You know, often you'll find that the players will just say, well, I just want to play. Now, I know that's been different in the case of kind of Rodri, who's suggested that players should strike, but a lot of players, if you get them privately, will always say that they will want to play. So imagine telling someone like Lamine Yamal or Max Dowman that actually you played 30 minutes on Saturday, you can't play another 30 minutes for 2 weeks. So it would be a radical approach. But the danger is that you do put too much pressure and you know, give these players too much minutes in the legs at a young age, and they just cannot ever reach their potential. And you're right, you know, it's obviously very, very early in Max Dowman's career, but if he reaches the point at which we all expect him to and is as good as we all expect him to be, then there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on Mikel Arteta at Arsenal to put him in the team week after week. He'll be picked very, very soon for international football, and all of a sudden you'll be writing the same piece you have done about Lamine Yamal, about him, because again, he's put thousands and thousands of minutes in his legs before he's even out of his teenage years, and it's a big ask for these young players, and I would support something coming in to protect them a little bit, even if they probably don't want to protect themselves.
I guess the question.
Yeah, sorry.
So I guess the question coming down the line is, will Max Dowman make the England squad for the World Cup at 16? It's possible, because obviously Yamal made it with Spain at 16 at the Euros, and he looks a real talent. But, you know, Sam, I mean, you know, I remember Phil Foden coming through at Man City, and Pep was really kind of cautious with him, and, you know, Phil's had his injuries, so you can't really say that that's proof that you should rest players. Obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo at Man United didn't play a lot for his first couple of years, and maybe he's reaping the benefit of that now. I mean, is there anything that Barcelona can learn from those?
Yeah, I was actually going to say about Phil Foden, because from the outside, that did feel a little bit like, Robin, yourself will know more, that, you know, the feeling was perhaps that Pep was holding back a little bit in those early years. I think the difference with Lamine and with Darwin, perhaps, in terms of, I place Darwin with Foden, is that Arteta and Guardiola have got squads which are, you know, full of stars, and there's not a dependency on, you know, bringing Foden in at that time or on bringing Darwin in now when you've just signed, you know, Eze. You've got all the strikers and attackers that Arsenal have got, whereas Lamine obviously came through at a time when Barcelona were desperate for some sort of star power, and it was a narrative that the club could sell. You know, look at this great young star from La Masia, and then on top of that, obviously the expectations were already high. But, you know, for him to then, obviously, because you never know how he's going to adapt to senior football, for him to adapt so quickly and become the star, there became a dependency on him so quickly. But yeah, like you said about Foden, I was just wondering if there were cases, because obviously, you know, of players that had been sort of drip fed minutes or whatnot. And when you come back to Messi as well, he wasn't without injury problems earlier in his career at Barcelona. It was only once he sort of got to his early 20s that he sort of moved them on and left them behind.